The snow had started falling before dawn, blanketing the narrow mountain roads of Willow Creek in thick, unyielding white. Elijah Carter, just 11 years old, trudged carefully along the icy path with a burlap bag in one hand and his little sister Sadie bundled against his back. The bag held a few pieces of cornbread he had made the night before, wrapped in foil and still slightly warm. He was heading into town, hoping to sell them to the early risers at the gas station, maybe earn enough for Sadie's medicine. Sadie, 6 years old and constantly sick with a cough that never seemed to leave her, rested her head against Elijah's shoulder. Her cheeks were flushed, her breaths shallow. Elijah shifted her weight and kept moving. The town of Willow Creek was the kind of place that time seemed to forget. Tucked deep in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, it was a town of rusted trucks, boarded windows, and long-closed coal mines. The only store still open year-round was Parker's Gas and Deli, where locals gathered for coffee, news, and second-hand gossip. As Elijah approached the edge of town, the snow began to fall harder. He pulled his jacket tighter, even though it was too small for him now. He was halfway across Main Street when the engine of a black SUV rumbled into earshot. It was out of place, too clean and too quiet for this town. Elijah glanced back just as it slowed near the sidewalk. The window rolled down. A man inside, clean-shaven, wearing a gray coat that looked expensive, leaned out. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked. Elijah stared at him but said nothing. The man's eyes shifted to the child on his back. "Is she sick?" Elijah hesitated, then muttered, "She's fine." "She doesn't look fine," the man said. "You need a ride somewhere?" "We don't need help." And with that, Elijah turned away, walking faster toward the gas station. Michael Anderson watched the boy go, something heavy pressing against his chest. He had only been back in Willow Creek for 2 days, returning reluctantly for his father's funeral. He hadn't planned on staying long, just enough time to sell the old family property and disappear again. But there was something about the boy's face. Something he couldn't explain. Something eerily familiar. That evening, after the burial, Michael found himself standing in the freezing wind outside Parker's. Inside, old men in flannel jackets sat nursing weak coffee. A waitress handed Elijah a $5 bill in exchange for 2 pieces of cornbread. It wasn't enough. Michael stood near the window, watching. The boy didn't notice him this time. But Michael noticed everything. The way Elijah slipped the money into a worn envelope, the way he cradled Sadie when she coughed, the quiet determination in his movements. Later that night, Michael couldn't sleep. He sat at the edge of the bed in the motel room, staring at an unopened envelope that had sat in his briefcase for over a decade. It had been mailed 15 years ago, sent by a woman he once loved. Emily Carter. The return address had been Willow Creek, but he'd never opened it. He opened it now. "Michael, I don't expect anything from you. I just thought you should know that I had a son. His name is Elijah. I named him that because it means strength of God. He deserves more than I can give, but I'll give him everything I have. I won't reach out again. Take care." Michael read the letter 3 times before he folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. His hands trembled. The next morning, he found his way to the Carter home, or what was left of it. A small shack with a slanted roof on the edge of the mountain, barely holding against the wind. Mrs. Beatrice, the elderly neighbor who had helped Emily from time to time, met him at the door. "You've got some nerve coming here," she said. "What do you want?" I think Elijah is my son," Michael said quietly. Beatrice studied him with tired, sharp eyes. "You think? Emily waited for you. She died waiting." "I didn't know," he said, voice breaking. "I didn't open her letter until last night." Beatrice snorted. "Well, that's 10 years too late, isn't it?" Michael didn't respond. He looked toward the room behind her, where he could hear Sadie's soft cough. Beatrice followed his gaze. "Elijah doesn't trust easy," she said. "He's had to grow up too fast. I want to help. I don't expect him to call me anything. I want to do something." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then sighing, she opened the door a little wider. Then stopped standing in doorways. "If you want to help, show up." Over the next few days, Michael did just that. He showed up. He helped repair the roof, brought food, paid for Sadie's prescriptions. Elijah never said much, but he stopped avoiding him. Then one morning, Michael made a decision. He drove up to the edge of the hill overlooking Willow Creek. The land had once been part of his family's estate, but had sat abandoned for years. At its peak stood an old storage barn, half-rotted but standing. He remembered playing there as a child. It overlooked the valley and caught the wind like a sail. By evening, he'd hired 2 men from town to help clean it out. Beatrice asked what he was doing. Michael told her. "I'm starting a classroom," he said. "A place for kids like Elijah. Kids who've been forgotten." "You're not a teacher." "No," he said. "But I can build a roof. And I can bring in people who care." Word spread quickly. Some folks thought he was out of his mind. Others said he was trying to buy his way into heaven. But a few, just a few, offered to help. And Elijah watched. He watched as the man who said nothing of being his father quietly built a space where no one had cared to build before. He watched as the old barn transformed, floor repaired, windows added, bookshelves installed. And he wondered. If a man could change wood and nails into shelter, maybe, just maybe, he could change something in himself too. The wind on the hill had changed. Where once it howled through broken boards and rotting rafters, it now passed through the newly framed windows of the old barn, stirring sawdust and sunlight across the floor. Inside, Michael Anderson stood with a hammer in his hand and sweat beading under the collar of his coat. He had just finished helping install the final shelf against the back wall. There was still no heat, and the roof leaked in 2 corners, but it was taking shape, this classroom that no one had asked for but that he felt compelled to build. From the doorway, Elijah watched him. "You're wasting your time," the boy said. Michael turned. "Maybe. But that's mine to waste, isn't it?" Elijah stepped into the room, hands stuffed deep in his coat pockets. He looked at the mismatched chairs, the old blackboard someone had donated from the church basement, and the books lined up on the shelves, books Michael had brought from Charleston and New York. "You think putting up shelves and handing out books makes up for everything?" "No," Michael said. "Nothing makes up for missing your whole life. I know that." "Then why are you doing it?" Michael set the hammer down. "Because it's the only thing I can do that feels right." Elijah looked away, jaw clenched. "You left my mom. She waited. She died waiting." Michael's voice was quiet. "I know. You weren't there when she couldn't breathe, when I had to carry Sadie on my back through the snow to the clinic. You weren't there when I had to decide between food and medicine." Michael nodded. "I wasn't." Elijah's eyes flashed. "So don't pretend like you care. You're not my father." Silence filled the room, broken only by the wind pushing against the window panes. Michael didn't respond with an apology or a defense. He picked up the broom and began sweeping the sawdust. Elijah turned and walked out. Over the following days, Michael kept working. Beatrice came by with hot tea and advice. A few neighbors, people who had once ignored him at the gas station, began offering scraps of help. Someone donated a heater. Someone else dropped off a bin of school supplies. He never asked for any of it. Elijah didn't return to the hilltop for a week. Not until Sadie asked him, plainly and without guile, "Can we go see the classroom?" Elijah hesitated. "Why?" "Because I want to draw on the chalkboard." So they went. The hilltop classroom was still rough, but it was warm now. The heater buzzed softly in the corner. A string of Christmas lights had been hung across the ceiling beams, casting a soft glow. Sadie walked in, wide-eyed, and ran straight to the chalkboard. Michael was kneeling by the bookshelf, sorting a box of paperbacks. He looked up, surprised but pleased. "Hey there." Sadie beamed. "Hi, Mr. Mike." "Elijah," Michael said cautiously. "I didn't come to talk," Elijah said. "She just wanted to see it." "That's fine. She's always welcome." Elijah leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching his sister draw stick figures. One of them had short curly hair and glasses. Michael noticed. "Is that me?" he asked. Sadie nodded. "You're telle in real life." Michael chuckled, and even Elijah cracked a smile. From that day on, Sadie started asking to go to the classroom regularly. And though Elijah never said it, he went too. At first to keep an eye on her, but slowly, cautiously, for himself. The classroom opened officially on a Monday morning in early February. A hand-painted sign out front read, Hilltop Learning Center. They started with 5 kids. By the end of the first week, there were 12. Some came after school. Others had dropped out and saw the classroom as a second chance. Michael wasn't a teacher, but he was a listener. He helped kids read, showed them how to search the internet, brought in old laptops he bought at pawn shops. He invited Miss Hargrove, a retired teacher from Charleston, to volunteer once a week. Reverend Thomas came in to talk about community and kindness.
The community's response was mixed.
Maybe he's trying to do good, said one man at Parker's. Or maybe he's just trying to buy back his conscience, said another. Either way, it's the first time someone gave a damn about these kids. Lauren Davis, Michael's ex-wife, called after reading a local news article online. "You're playing savior now?" she snapped. "I'm trying to be present," Michael said.
You veux goat qui in the city où barli see you. And now you're starting a school for strangers.
"They're not strangers," he said. "One of them is my son."
Silence.
"You mean that boy?" she asked.
The one from your mess of a past.
"His name is Elijah. And yes."
Lorraine exhaled.
"You really think this ends well for anyone?" "I don't know," Michael said. "But I think it has to start somewhere." Later that week, Sadie brought home a flyer for a community potluck organized by the Hilltop classroom. Elijah didn't want to go. "They're just gonna talk about us," he said. "Whisper about my mom and him." "Maybe," Beatrice said. "But maybe they'll listen too. And maybe someone else needs what that place is offering." So Elijah went. He stood in the back of the classroom, watching Michael talk with parents and kids, helping carry trays of food, laughing at a little boy's joke. And for the first time, Elijah allowed himself to see not the man who left, but the man who stayed.
The man who built something from nothing.
Who never said, "I'm your father," but kept showing up anyway. Later that night, as they walked home, Sadie slipped her hand into Elijah's. "Do you think we could ever call him Dad?" Elijah didn't answer. But the question stayed with him long after the snow began to fall again. By late February, the wind on the hill had softened, and so had the edges between Michael and the town. The Hilltop Learning Center was no longer just an experiment or a rumor, it had become a rhythm. Children came each afternoon, their boots caked in mud or snow, their hands full of questions. Inside the old barn, once abandoned and silent, voices echoed with new life. Michael arrived early every morning. He unlocked the door, turned on the heater, and checked the donated books for bent spines or torn pages. He made cocoa when the kettle worked and cleaned the floors when the roof leaked. Slowly, the place took on a soul. Not just because of the children, but because something in Michael had shifted too. He no longer checked his phone every hour or thought about the next deal waiting in New York. He was here now, rooted in the creaking floorboards and the kids who filled the seats. Elijah, though still cautious, had started helping more. He corrected the younger kid's spelling, fixed the loose leg on a wobbly chair, and organized the supply shelves without being asked. He still didn't call Michael Dad, but he no longer looked away when their eyes met. Sadie, meanwhile, was thriving. Her cough had weakened, her cheeks filled out, and she now carried a sketchbook everywhere.
She drew the classroom, the hill, the other keys.
On one page, she drew a picture of Elijah and Michael sitting side by side, smiling. When Michael saw it, he couldn't speak for a long while. But not everyone was smiling. On a gray Thursday, the first signs of trouble arrived. A letter, official and cold, stamped with the seal of the county. It informed Michael that the land on which the classroom stood had never been properly transferred. Though he had inherited rights through his family, the deed had been tangled in years of neglect and local politics. The land was now under review for developmental interest. "What does that mean?" Elijah asked when Michael showed him the letter. "It means someone wants this land," Michael said, folding the paper. "And they might have the money to get it." Later that week, whispers spread through town. A developer from Charleston was in talks with the county to build a private lodge on the hill. Rumors said the land could be worth hundreds of thousands if turned into a luxury getaway. Why would they want this place? Elijah asked Beatrice. "Because it's pretty when you don't have to live here," she replied.
The uncertainty, you like smoke.
Parents stopped sending their kids. Volunteers hesitated. The warmth inside the classroom gave way to a kind of uneasy silence. Then one night, it happened. Michael arrived early the next morning and found the front door of the classroom ajar. Inside, chairs were overturned. Books were scattered and torn. The chalkboard had been defaced with slurs in red paint. The heater had been smashed. Elijah arrived minutes later and froze at the doorway. Sadie clutched his hand tightly. Michael stood in the middle of the wreckage, eyes fixed on the broken chalkboard. "We should call the police," Elijah said, his voice sharp with anger. Michael nodded. "Already did." "Who would do this?" Michael didn't answer, but he had his suspicions. Not everyone in town had warmed to the idea of the classroom. And some had deep roots in old land deals and deeper resentments about city people coming back. The sheriff came, took photos, filled out a report. But it was clear nothing would be done soon. That afternoon, instead of canceling class, Michael propped open the doors and began cleaning. Elijah joined him. Then Beatrice. Then 2 more parents. By dusk, the chairs were upright, the graffiti scrubbed as best they could, and a new space heater hummed in the corner. Elijah stayed behind after the others had gone. "They're not going to stop," he said. "I know," Michael replied. "So what are we going to do?" Michael sat down, weary but calm. "We build again." "Even if they tear it down?" "Especially then." That night, Elijah lay awake, Sadie asleep beside him, listening to the wind rattle the windows. He thought about his mother, about how she used to say, "The people who fight the quiet fights, those are the ones who change things." The next morning, he returned to the hill alone and drew on the clean chalkboard in bold letters. "This place belongs to US. We aren't leaving." The next day, 20 kids showed up. But the fight was only beginning. The county sent another letter. This time, a formal notice. The land would be put up for public auction in 3 weeks. Anyone could bid. The highest offer would take ownership. Michael stared at the paper for a long time. "I can't compete with a corporation," he said. "They'll outbid me in a second." "You're giving up?" Elijah asked. "No," Michael said. "But I need to find another way." The town was buzzing. Some saw opportunity, land values rising, jobs, tourism. Others feared change. But for the children who had found something like hope in that old barn, the loss felt personal. At dinner that evening, Elijah put down his fork and looked across the table. "If they take the hill, where do we go?" Michael didn't answer at first. Then he looked the boy in the eye. "We find another hill. Or we fight for this one." Elijah nodded. "Then teach me how to fight." Michael smiled, tired but proud. "You already know how." And so they prepared. Flyers were printed. Stories were shared. A petition was started, signatures gathered. The town's local newspaper featured a front-page article, "The Classroom on the Hill, One Man's Redemption, a Town's Dilemma." People who had never visited the classroom now walked up the hill to see it. Some still turned away. But others stayed. And in the days leading up to the auction, something unexpected began to happen. People started donating. À Jarad the dîner. An envelope left anonymously on the school steps. A retired teacher sent a check. A truck driver gave a week's wages. It wasn't much. But it was something. And it meant they weren't alone. The courthouse in Charleston wasn't built for stories like theirs. Its high ceilings and echoing chambers held the dry smell of paperwork and procedure. But on the day of the land auction, it became a battlefield, not of weapons, but of memory, money, and will. Michael sat in the second row, a manila envelope clutched in his hands. Inside was every cent he had been able to raise: personal savings, small donations from neighbors, envelopes full of crumpled bills left anonymously at the Hilltop Learning Center. It wasn't much compared to what the developers could bring, but it was something. Beside him sat Reverend Thomas, calm and still. A few rows back, Elijah sat with Sadie and Beatrice. The girl clutched her sketchbook tight, her eyes wide with nerves. On the other side of the room sat 3 men in suits, representatives from Mid-Summit Properties, a real estate development firm with eyes on turning the hill into a luxury mountain resort. They didn't look at Michael. They didn't need to. Their posture said everything. This was already decided. The county clerk stepped forward, cleared her throat, and began. "This public land auction is for parcel 12 to 47, listed as Hilltop Ridge, formerly Anderson family property. Opening bid, $100,000. The room went still.
Michael stood.
I bid $100,000. A man in a navy suit raised his hand. $150. Michael swallowed, raised his voice. $175. $200, came the swift reply. It climbed quickly. $250. $275. Michael hesitated, then called out, $300,000. The room rustled. The developer's rep whispered something to his colleague, then spoke, $325,000.
Michael sat back down.
That was it. That was the ceiling. The envelope in his hand might as well have been empty now. Elijah stared at him from across the room, fists clenched. Michael didn't raise his hand again. The clerk waited. Any further bids?
Silence.
Then a voice from the back, $350,000. All heads turned. Beatrice stood, cane in one hand, bank envelope in the other. 350, she repeated. On behalf of this community.
The room murmured.
People hadn't seen her in public in years. She turned to the clerk and added, and we're not done yet. One by one, others began to stand. A mechanic from Main Street.
The dîner waitress.
An out-of-work coal miner with a scruffy beard.
A teacher from the school district.
Each with an envelope, a check, a promise. The clerk, stunned, asked, Are you saying you're pooling funds? Yes, Reverend Thomas said, standing beside Michael now. We represent a community trust, formed yesterday, filed this morning. Legal and binding. The developer's representatives whispered urgently, uncomfortable now. Michael looked down at the envelope in his lap. It no longer felt small. It felt like part of something bigger than him. The bidding resumed, but now the energy had shifted. Mid-Summit raised once more, $375, but stopped when it became clear the room would not back down. $400,000, Reverend Thomas declared. Final bid. The clerk nodded. Sold. It was done. The room erupted, not with cheers, but with breath. As if everyone had been holding it for weeks. Elijah exhaled and looked to Michael. Michael didn't smile. Not yet. His eyes were misty, his hands shaking. Not from fear. From release. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, residents from Willow Creek who couldn't make it in, holding signs made by their kids. One read, This hill taught me to dream. That night, back at the hilltop classroom, they gathered under strings of mismatched lights. Elijah stood in front of the chalkboard, hands trembling slightly as he looked at the crowd. Sadie stood beside him, sketchbook clutched to her chest. He cleared his throat. My mom once told me that some people get their names written on buildings, and others leave their names behind in hearts. He paused.
Used to hate this place.
Not the hill, but what it meant.
Being forgotten.
Left behind. I thought my dad left because we weren't enough. I thought maybe if I worked hard enough, kept Sadie safe, I could forget I ever needed him. He turned to Michael. But then he showed up. And he didn't say much. He just stayed. He kept building, even when we told him to go. He didn't try to erase the past, he just tried to build something better. Michael looked down, jaw tight, eyes wet. Elijah continued. This hill doesn't just belong to us. It belongs to anyone who's ever thought they didn't matter. Who thought their story wasn't worth telling. He looked out across the room, at kids with dirt on their jeans, at mothers who worked night shifts, at old men who hadn't smiled in years. This classroom saved me, Elijah said. And I want to spend the rest of my life building ones like it.
Silence.
Then applause, raw and rising.
Laté, under the star, Michael and Elias stood outside the barn.
You did good, Michael said. You did better, Elijah replied. Michael looked up at the hill.
You know, when he left this town, he swore he'd never come back.
I used to say the same thing, Elijah said.
Funny how things change.
Michael turned to him. You still don't have to call me anything you're not ready to. Elijah nodded. Then, after a pause, he said quietly, Dad.
Michael S. briscoed.
He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They stood side by side, the wind rustling through the grass, the lights of the classroom flickering behind them like fireflies.
Eilons forgotten.
Now a home.
Spring came slowly to Willow Creek.
The snow melted in patches, revealing tired earth and the promise of green beneath. Birds returned to the hill, perching on the rafters of the barn-turned classroom, their songs echoing between laughter and chalk dust. The Hilltop Learning Center had survived. More than that, it had bloomed. Kids came in greater numbers now, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Parents brought donated supplies. A retired teacher started a weekly science club. The town's public school began collaborating, sending over extra textbooks and offering lunch vouchers. For the first time in years, Willow Creek wasn't just holding on, it was building forward. Inside the classroom, the walls were covered in student artwork, story maps, dreams scribbled in colored markers. In the center, nailed to the back wall, was a wooden plaque carved by Elijah himself. Emily Carter Community Classroom, for every kid who thought no one believed in them. It had been Sadie's idea. She deserves her name on the door, she'd said softly. She believed in us before anyone else did. Michael hadn't said anything when they first unveiled the plaque. He just placed his hand on the wood, his eyes lingering on each letter. That evening, long after everyone had left, he stayed behind and sat beneath the sign, silent. A week later, he made a decision. On a Tuesday afternoon, he called Elijah outside and handed him a manila envelope. "What's this?" Elijah asked. Michael smiled. "It's a copy of the land deed.
The hill.
The building. Everything. It's in your name now."
Elia blinked.
"Wait, what?" "You'll be 18 in a few months," Michael said. "It'll transfer fully then. Until that day, it'll be under a community trust. But this is yours to grow. Or change. Or protect. However you see fit." Elijah stared at the paper. "Why?" Michael looked toward the classroom, where kids were reading and coloring under soft lamplight.
"Because someday you'll be gone.
And this place isn't about me. It never was. But you're the reason it lived. I don't know how to run a school. You already are." That night, Elijah sat with Sadie on the front porch of their house. The stars were beginning to show, one by one. "Do you think Mom would have liked it?" she asked. "I think she'd be proud," he replied. "I miss her." "I do too." Sadie leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think Uncle Mike misses her too." Elijah nodded. "He does. Every day." She paused. "I'm glad he came back." Elijah didn't respond right away. Then he said, "Me too." Time passed. The town changed in small ways. The diner updated its menu. The local clinic hired a new nurse. A small library opened in a shared space behind the post office. But the biggest change wasn't in the buildings. It was in the people. People who once said nothing good comes out of Willow Creek now said, "You should see what they're doing on the hill." One morning in early summer, Michael stood in front of the classroom with a cup of coffee and watched the sunrise. Elijah walked up beside him, taller now, older in the eyes. "I got accepted," Elijah said. Michael turned. "Where?"
"Appalachian State.
Education program. Full ride."
Michael looked, loud and proud.
"You serious?" Elijah nodded. "I wasn't going to apply. But Reverend Thomas pushed me. Said if I want to teach, I should know how to do it right." Michael clapped him on the back. "Your mom would have lost her mind." "I think she knows." They stood there for a while, watching the sun stretch over the trees. "I don't know if I'm ready," Elijah said. "No one ever is," Michael replied. "But the best teachers are the ones who remember what it felt like to be a student." "Who's going to run the classroom while I'm gone?" Michael smiled. "Don't worry. I've got a few ideas. And Beatrice already threatened to take over if I mess it up." Elijah chuckled.
"She's Carrieden the county clerk."
Later that day, the classroom held a small graduation celebration. Not an official school event, but a community one. Parents brought pies. Kids brought handmade cards. Elijah gave a short speech, voice cracking slightly when he thanked the man who taught me how to show up, even when it's hard.
Michael said nothing in return.
Just hugged him hard.
When the fall came, Elia left for college. Sadie criait fortrides.
Michael drove him to campus, helped carry boxes into the dorm, then stood awkwardly in the parking lot. You sure you'll be okay? Elijah asked. I've got a classroom to run, Michael said. Elijah nodded. You're doing good. You're doing better. Then, just before getting in the car, Michael paused. I wasn't there for the start of your story, he said. But I'm honored to be part of where it goes next. Elijah didn't say anything. He didn't need to. When he returned home for the holidays, he found the classroom still thriving. The walls now had new shelves, new stories. Sadie had become a junior assistant, helping the younger kids read aloud and teaching them to draw. On one cold December night, Elijah stood again in front of the chalkboard. This time, as a guest teacher. The kids sat quietly, their eyes wide. He wrote 3 words in big block letters.
Your story matters.
Then he turned to them and said, because it does. Every single one of you has something to say. And this classroom? It's where you learn to say it. Michael stood in the back, hands in his pockets, pride on his face. The wind outside was picking up again, brushing against the old walls like a whisper from the past. But inside, there was warmth. A light that never went out. A place built from broken pieces, now whole.
Eilons forgotten.
Now a home.